A single mother working 3 jobs stopped in the freezing November rain in Boston to help an old woman across the road, while the rushing crowd walked past without a second glance. She never knew the trembling hand she was holding belonged to the mother of the most dangerous man in the city, a man who never smiled, never forgave, and never owed anyone anything. Those 30 seconds of kindness changed her life forever. If Delaney's story touched your heart, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe that kindness still finds its way back. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The old woman's feet had barely touched the sidewalk when Delaney started to pull her hand away, but the woman didn't let go. Those thin, dry fingers tightened around Delaney's wrist, hard enough to hurt, with far more strength than a woman of 76 should have possessed. Delaney stood still. Rainwater ran down her spine and soaked through her thin uniform, but she didn't dare wrench her hand free. The old woman looked up at her. Her eyes were wet, though Delaney couldn't tell whether it was from the rain or something else. "You have the hands of someone who knows pain," she said. Her voice still carried the heavy accent of southern Italy, the voice of someone who had carried an entire homeland across the ocean and never once given it back. "I knew it right away. These hands have worked too hard." Delaney gave a faint, weary smile. "I only work at a diner, ma'am. That isn't what I mean." The old woman shook her head. Then she turned Delaney's hand palm up and studied the calloused skin as though she were reading a page. "I mean this. Don't let life harden it. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Delaney didn't understand. All she knew was that she was late. 12 minutes late. And the office building on Congress Street never waited for anyone. The night shift manager had already warned her twice that month. Yet she remained there in the rain, allowing a stranger to hold her hand. "I have to go," she said softly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I still have another shift." The old woman didn't ask another question about that shift. She asked only one thing. "What is your name?" "Delaney. Delaney." The woman repeated it slowly, as though placing it somewhere safe. "I'm Rosaria." Then she released her hand. Seeing the old woman trembling in the freezing rain, Delaney unbuttoned her thin, worn coat, the only coat she owned for the Boston winter, and wrapped it around Rosaria's shoulders. "Keep warm, ma'am," she whispered softly. Delaney gave a small nod, pulled up the collar of her thin diner uniform, and ran. She hurried along Hanover Street with her shoes soaked through, every step making a wet, squelching sound against the rain-slick bricks. She didn't look back even once. If she had, she might have seen the car. A black Maybach glided toward the curb where the old woman stood, moving so slowly and smoothly that it made almost no sound amid the traffic. The door opened. A man in a suit stepped out first, raised an umbrella over her, and bowed his head at the angle people reserved for those who were truly important. If Delaney had looked back, she might also have seen 2 other men standing behind the car, their hands inside their coat pockets, their eyes sweeping the length of the street in a very particular way, but she didn't look back. She was thinking about next month's rent. She was calculating how much money she would have left that week if the manager took away today's shift. She was thinking about her daughter's asthma inhaler, which had felt noticeably lighter when she picked it up that morning. At that moment, there was no room in Delaney Marsh's mind for an old woman in a blue wool scarf. She had done what needed to be done, and then she had kept moving, just as she had always kept moving through all 27 years of her life. 30 seconds. That was all the time she had given to a complete stranger, in the middle of an afternoon when she herself had nothing left to give. She asked for nothing. She didn't wait for a second word of thanks. She hadn't even taken the time to look closely at the woman's face. Behind her, Rosaria Vitale remained beneath the umbrella, watching the slight figure of the young woman disappear into the curtain of rain, her hand still held in the same position as before, as though she were still holding on to something. "Ma'am," the driver said softly, "the young master is waiting." The old woman nodded, but she didn't get into the car right away. She stood there a little longer, and in that brief moment, she repeated the name she had just heard exactly once, making certain she wouldn't forget it. By then, Delaney was already 3 blocks away, breathless as she pushed open the glass door of the office building and stepped into her second shift of the day. She had no idea that the name she had spoken beneath the rain would soon be repeated inside a room that ordinary people could live their entire lives without ever entering. And in just 4 days, her life would no longer belong to her. The clock on the wall read 12:40 in the morning when Delaney slipped her key into the lock of the room above Doyle's diner. She opened the door as quietly as she could. The wooden staircase outside creaked, and she had long since learned to avoid the 3rd step, Inside, only the nightlight in the corner was still glowing dimly. Poppy lay on her side in the little bed against the wall, the blanket fallen to her waist, the stuffed rabbit named Biscuit tucked beneath her chin, as it was every night. Delaney pulled the blanket back over her daughter, stood there watching her for one more second, then turned away. She took off her wet shoes and placed them upside down on the old towel beside the heater so they might be dry by morning. She hung her diner uniform on a hook, then folded the janitor's clothes from her night shift and tucked them into a bag. She did all of it in the dark without turning on another light, because the light would wake the little girl. Then she sat down at the table beside the window. There was an envelope on the tabletop. She didn't need to open it to know what was written inside. This was the 4th letter that month. She had read the first 3, read them carefully, read them so many times that she had memorized even the way the lines were spaced. But she opened this one anyway, because some small part of her still believed that perhaps the number might be different this time. It wasn't. $40,000, in the name of Trent Novak, the man who had married her when she was 21, who had promised her everything in a little church in Somerville, and who had disappeared 18 months ago with the pickup truck and every dollar in their joint account. He hadn't left a single word behind. He had left only his name on papers like the one she was holding now. Delaney read the entire letter from beginning to end. Gong folded it into quarters. She pulled open the desk drawer. 3 other letters were already inside, each folded into quarters and stacked neatly one on top of another. She placed the 4th beneath them, closed the drawer, and didn't think about it again. That was how she survived. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because if she allowed herself to be afraid at 12:40 in the morning, she wouldn't be able to get up at 6. She took the tin box down from the top of the refrigerator and began counting her tips. She separated the $1 bills from the $5 bills. She counted twice to be certain. $43. She divided the money into 3 portions on the table. The first was for the electric bill. The second was for the rent, and that portion was always the largest and always too small. She placed the third in a separate corner, the neatest pile, the smallest pile, and the one she looked at longest. That was the money for Poppy's asthma inhaler. She picked up the inhaler from the top of the cabinet, shook it gently, and held it to her ear. About 1/3 remained. Enough for 3 weeks if the little girl didn't have an attack. Not enough for anything if she did. Delaney set it down very gently, as though handling it too roughly might make it emptier. Then she sat motionless in the darkness for a long while, both hands resting in her lap. Those hands were cracked at the fingertips from dishwater and floor-cleaning chemicals. The nails clipped close, a faint scar running across her left wrist from her years in foster care, something she had never told anyone about. And suddenly she remembered the old woman in the blue wool scarf that afternoon. She remembered the way the woman had turned Delaney's hand palm up beneath the rain and looked into it. Don't let life harden it. Delaney shook her head slightly, feeling foolish. The old woman probably said things like that to anyone who helped her. Delaney turned off the nightlight, lay down beside her daughter, and fell asleep in less than 2 minutes, like someone who had spent the very last of her strength. 3 miles away, in a room with high ceilings and walls paneled in dark wood, someone had just spoken her name for the first time. In the rear cabin of the Maybach, the lights had been turned down to their lowest setting. Massimo Vitale sat in the seat on the right, one elbow resting on his knee, his eyes fixed on the screen of his phone. Displayed there was a photograph of a shipping manifest from Charlestown Harbor, 3 containers that had been held since Tuesday afternoon, without anyone offering an explanation. He had read it 4 times. When the car door opened and his mother settled into the seat beside him, he didn't look up. The driver folded the umbrella, closed the door, and returned to the wheel. The car began to move. Rosaria removed her blue wool scarf, lightly wrung out the droplets still clinging to it, and propped her wooden cane with its silver handle against the side of the seat. Massimo still didn't look up. "If you go out alone one more time," he said, his voice as flat as the surface of a steel table, "I'll have someone guard the door." That was the entirety of his greeting. He didn't ask whether she was all right. He didn't ask whether the rain had been cold. He didn't ask why a woman of 76 had been standing at the corner of Hanover Street during rush hour without telling anyone. He delivered the words as though he were reading a clause from a contract. Rosaria turned her head and studied her son, 34 years old. His black overcoat still held every crease. On his ring finger was the ring engraved with the letter V, the same ring his father had worn for 29 years before passing it on to him. She had watched that face since the day it had been red and newborn in her arms inside a small hospital in the North End, and she knew exactly when it had begun to harden. She didn't answer his threat. She said only one thing, very softly, almost as though speaking to herself. A young girl took off the only coat she owned and gave it to me. Massimo set down his phone. Not quickly, without a single unnecessary movement. He merely turned the screen face down against his thigh and looked at his mother for the first time since she had entered the car. Who? I don't know. A girl who works at some diner. Rosaria shrugged, deliberately making the gesture seem unimportant. She stood there in the rain. She was late for work, and she still stopped. The whole street walked past me. Massimo. The whole street. He said nothing. Beyond the window, the streetlights of the north end drifted by in blurred streaks of yellow across the rain-soaked glass. Did you ask her name? Yes. Rosaria said nothing more. She knew how to let a story grow inside another person's mind. She had lived in that house long enough to learn it from her husband. Massimo didn't ask again. He picked up his phone. But for the remaining 7 minutes of the drive, the same shipping manifest stayed on the screen, while his eyes remained fixed beyond the window. The car turned onto the incline leading up to Beacon Hill. The iron gates opened before the car had fully stopped and closed again the moment it passed through. 2 men stood on either side of the front steps. They nodded when Massimo stepped out, and neither of them spoke a word. Inside, there were dark wood floors, pale yellow wall lamps, the scent of furniture polish, and the fragrance of herbs drifting from the kitchen. Rosaria walked ahead, leaning on her cane as she climbed the stairs. She stopped at the landing and called down to him. Teresa left your dinner on the table. I already ate. He hadn't. She knew it. She didn't repeat herself. Massimo climbed the stairs and walked along the second-floor hallway. At the far end stood a closed door. A thin sliver of light shone from beneath it, which meant the lamp inside was still on. On the floor before that door sat a tray. On the tray were a plate of pasta, a glass of milk, and a napkin folded into a perfect square. The pasta was untouched. The milk was untouched. No one had unfolded the napkin. Massimo stopped. He stood there for a long time, longer than a man like him allowed himself to remain still anywhere. He lifted a hand toward the doorknob. His fingers touched the cold brass. He kept them there for several seconds. Then he lowered his hand. He looked at the tray once more, continued toward his study at the opposite end of the corridor, and closed the door behind him. Inside, he removed his overcoat, hung it up, poured himself a glass of liquor, and didn't drink it. He sat behind his desk, opened the shipping manifest on his screen again, and stared at it for another 20 minutes without absorbing a single word. Because what occupied his mind then wasn't the 3 containers at Charlestown Harbor. It was a very small, very unreasonable question, one that a man like him should never have concerned himself with. In this city, in the year 2025, was there still anyone willing to take off the only coat they owned and give it to a stranger? It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning before he finally picked up the phone and called Gianni Sarno. Gianni Sarno answered on the second ring because, at 41 years old, and after 19 years of working for the Vitali family, he had long since abandoned the habit of sleeping deeply. The corner of Hanover and Cross, this afternoon, around 5 o'clock, Massimo said. A young woman in a diner uniform. Blue stripes. Find her for me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What did she do? She helped my mother cross the street. Another pause followed, longer this time. Gianni had received many kinds of requests from this man over the years, but this was the first of its kind. How long do I have? 3 hours. Massimo ended the call. Gianni didn't need 3 hours. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, while dawn had yet to fully break and the north end was still asleep, Gianni knocked on the study door and placed a thin folder on the dark wooden desk. Massimo was still sitting exactly where he had been. The glass of liquor he had poured the night before remained untouched. He opened the folder. The first page held an image taken from the security camera of a convenience store, grainy, gray, and blurred, showing a young woman running along the sidewalk in the rain with her collar pulled high. Her face couldn't be seen clearly, but the posture of someone trying to outrun the clock was unmistakable. The second page contained her information. Delaney Marsh, 27 years old, born in Lowell. No parents listed in her records. She had passed through 4 foster homes before the age of 16. No college education, 3 jobs at the same time, morning shifts at Doyle's Diner, night shifts with Hallmark Cleaning Company, and weekends at a laundromat in Chelsea. She rented a room directly above the diner. She had a 6-year-old daughter. Her former husband had left the state 18 months earlier, and his current whereabouts were unknown. Massimo read every line, no faster and no slower than he would have read a shipping contract. Then he turned to the third page. It contained her financial records. His eyes passed over the debt in Trent Novak's name. The amount didn't make him stop because, in this city, he had seen numbers far greater than that. What stopped him was the line beneath it, the line bearing the lender's name. He read it once. He read it a second time. He read it a third time. And this time, he placed his finger on the paper directly beneath the name, Aldo Ferrante. There was no sound in the room except the ticking of the pendulum clock in the hallway. Gianni remained where he stood, his hands clasped in front of him, and asked nothing. He had read the file before bringing it upstairs, and he knew exactly what Massimo was looking at. Aldo Ferrante was a man of the Vitale family, 45 years old. He managed 3 warehouses in the Eastern District and the entire collections operation south of the river. He was the man who had stood beside Massimo's father at the funeral, the man who had gripped Massimo's hand and told him, "You can rest easy. I'm here." On paper, Ferrante had no authority to issue private loans in his own name. On paper, every loan of that kind had to cross Massimo's desk first. "How long have you known about this?" Massimo asked. "Since I opened her credit file. 40 minutes ago. Are there others? I haven't checked yet. If you want me to, I'll need a few days." Massimo closed the folder slowly and rested his palm on the cover. He wasn't angry. That was what made him frightening. An angry man could be appeased, but no one knew what to do with a man who simply sat in silence and began calculating. "Check everything," he said. "The last 3 years. Every loan. Every name." "Yes, sir." He slid the folder into the drawer on his right, locked it, and slipped the key into his coat pocket. Then he looked up at Gianni, and Gianni. "Yes, sir. Don't let Ferrante know we've seen this." Gianni nodded once, stepped out, and closed the door behind him. Massimo remained alone in the room as daylight slowly began to gather along the edges of the curtains. That young woman knew nothing. She had merely helped an old woman cross the street, but her name had just fallen into a file, and inside that file was a thread leading straight back to his own family. Massimo rose and reached for his overcoat. He had decided to meet her. What he didn't yet know was that someone would already be sitting at the counter inside Doyle's diner before he arrived that morning. At 7:15 on Thursday morning, Doyle's diner was as crowded as it always was. Delaney had been behind the counter for an hour and a half, her hair tied back in a hurry, a coffee pot in her left hand, while her right tore off checks. Hattie Doyle stood in the kitchen shouting the names of dishes through the service window, and Delaney answered every table without once looking down at her order pad. She remembered everything. Table 4 took no sugar, Table 7 wanted the eggs cooked well done, and the old man in the farthest corner ate only half his toast each morning and wrapped the other half to take home. It was the one job she did better than anything else in the world, and it was also why she noticed the stranger the moment he sat down at the counter. The man appeared to be about 45. He wore a gray suit, and instead of hanging up his overcoat, he had folded it across his lap. He sat with his back straight and both hands resting on the counter, and he didn't reach for a menu. Delaney walked over. "Good morning, sir. What can I get you?" "Just black coffee." He smiled. It was a measured smile, perfectly appropriate, giving away neither too much nor too little. "Thank you, Delaney." She poured the coffee. Her hand remained steady, but something inside her chest had just dropped a notch. That old feeling children raised in 4 different foster homes learned early, the instinctive awareness that the temperature in a room had suddenly changed. She wasn't wearing a name tag. Doyle's had never used name tags. "You know me?" she asked, her voice still gentle. "Boston's a small city." He took a sip and nodded approvingly. "Good coffee, stronger than what they serve at those places along the main streets. Hattie makes it the old-fashioned way. The old ways are always better." He looked through the window. Outside, the sky was gray, and the sidewalk was still damp from the previous day's rain. "That was quite a storm yesterday. I hear it'll rain again this weekend. November is always like that here, wet and cold. And then suddenly the sun comes out one day as though it's mocking everyone." Delaney wiped the counter. She said nothing. 4 other customers were waiting, but her feet wouldn't move. "How long have you worked here?" 4 years. 4 years. He nodded slowly, as though the number held some private meaning for him. "That's hard work. And I hear you work nights too. I suppose when you're raising a child alone, you don't have much choice." Delaney set down the cloth. "What do you want?" He didn't answer her question. He placed the cup on its saucer, turned it slightly so that the handle faced outward, then raised his eyes to hers. His gaze was entirely ordinary. That was the part that chilled her. "Your little girl gets out of school at 3:10, doesn't she?" he asked. "The gate on Salem Street. The other gate's been closed since the beginning of the year." The diner was still filled with the clatter of forks against plates, Hattie calling out orders from the kitchen, and the bell above the door ringing whenever someone entered. Delaney heard every sound as though she were listening from underwater. "It's going to get cold soon," the man continued, his tone still as mild as if he were discussing the weather, which in truth he was. "Make sure she wears an extra coat. Children get sick so easily." Then he took out his wallet and placed a $20 bill on the counter beside the cup of coffee that cost $1.95. He didn't wait for change. He picked up his overcoat, gave her one courteous nod, and walked out. The bell above the door rang. Delaney remained where she was. She was still holding the coffee pot, and now it had begun to tremble in her hand. She tried to pour coffee for the customer at table 3 and spilled a long stream across the counter. "Delaney?" Hattie leaned her head through the kitchen doorway. "What's wrong, honey?" "Nothing." Delaney grabbed a cloth and wiped the coffee away, rubbing the same spot far longer than necessary. "Who was that sitting there?" "I don't know." It was the truth. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he did. She knew only one thing, that he knew what time her daughter left school and which gate she used. 3 days later, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a black car pulled up outside Doyle's diner. It eased close to the curb without a sound, its horn silent, its lights dark. Yet inside the diner, the conversation gradually faded, as though someone had turned down the volume. The old man at the table in the farthest corner stopped chewing. The 2 electricians at table 6 turned toward the window at the same time, then both quickly turned back. In the north end, no one needed to know who was inside the car. They only needed to see the car itself. Delaney was wiping down table 2 when Hattie came out of the kitchen, still holding the frying spatula in her hand, and stood staring through the door without saying a word. A man in a suit stepped out, walked around the front of the car, and opened the diner door. The bell rang. "Miss Marsh?" he asked. "Yes. Rosaria Vitali would like to invite you to meet with her. The car is waiting outside." Hattie set the spatula on the counter. She came forward, took hold of Delaney's wrist, and pulled her back half a step. Her grip was far tighter than usual. "Honey," she whispered, her voice low enough that only the 2 of them could hear. "Everyone in this neighborhood knows which family that car belongs to. Don't get in." Delaney looked at her. Then she looked through the window at the black car sitting motionless by the curb. If this had happened 3 days earlier, she might have refused. But 3 days earlier, no man in a gray suit had sat at the counter and told her which gate her daughter used after school. She hadn't slept for 3 nights. For the past 3 afternoons, she had asked Hattie to let her leave 15 minutes early so she could wait at the Salem Street gate, arriving at 2:50 each time, and each time she had searched the area to see whether anyone was watching her. "Rosaria is the old woman I helped in the rain," Delaney said. "She's that man's mother." "I know." Delaney gently freed her hand from Hattie's grasp and took off her apron. "If I'm not back by 7, please pick Poppy up from school for me." "Delaney, please." She walked to the door. Inside the car, the leather seats were still warm and the windows were darkly tinted, and no one said a single word to her throughout the entire drive. The car left the narrow streets of the north end, followed the waterfront, then began climbing uphill. The houses on either side grew farther apart, taller, and older in the way that only money could make age look beautiful. The iron gates opened before the car had even come to a stop. Delaney stepped out and had to tilt her head back to take in the full height of the house. Inside, the floor was paved with white marble threaded with gray veins. A dark wooden staircase curved upward to the second floor, and the ceilings rose so high that even the sound of her footsteps echoed back. Oil paintings in gilded frames hung on the walls. She didn't know who had painted them, and she didn't dare ask. Her shoes left faint, damp marks on the stone. She stepped back half a pace and bent down as though to wipe them away, then stopped herself. 2 men stood at the top of the staircase. They didn't look at her with hostility. They merely looked, took note of her presence, and continued standing where they were. Both wore suits, and beneath the fabric at each man's left hip was a slight bulge that Delaney deliberately avoided staring at for too long. "Delaney!" Rosaria came out through the living room doorway, leaning on her cane and moving far more quickly than she had that rainy afternoon. She didn't stop at a polite distance. She came straight to Delaney and embraced her. It was a real embrace, both arms wrapped around her back, her cheek pressed against Delaney's shoulder. Delaney stood rigid for several seconds. She was 27 years old, and she couldn't remember the last time anyone had held her that way, or whether anyone ever had. "You came." The old woman released her, took both of Delaney's hands, and once again looked down at her palms, just as she had before. "I was afraid you wouldn't." Come in. Sit down. Would you like tea or coffee? We have cake too." She drew Delaney into the living room, settled her into an armchair near the fireplace, and talked without pause, asking about the diner, her night shifts, and whether she had eaten dinner. Delaney answered in short, hesitant phrases. She sat on the edge of the chair with her back straight, her knees pressed together, and her hands resting in her lap to hide the cracks at her fingertips. She didn't know why she was there. She knew only that somewhere inside this house was the answer to why a stranger knew exactly when and where her daughter left school. Then the living room door opened. Rosaria stopped in the middle of a sentence. Delaney turned her head. The man who entered was nothing like anything she had imagined. He wasn't large in a threatening way. He didn't glare, raise his voice, or bring a crowd of men behind him. He merely stepped into the room, closed the door, and the entire room changed at once. Delaney sprang to her feet before she had time to think. In that moment, before she saw a human being, she saw danger. "Miss Marsh?" He spoke her name, and she realized she had risen from the chair without being invited. "Yes, sir. Sit down." She sat. He didn't. He walked around the chair opposite her, rested one hand on its back, and studied her. "I'm Massimo Vitale. You helped my mother." "I only helped her cross the street, sir." "I know what you did." He took a white envelope from the inside pocket of his coat and placed it on the low table between them. Delaney looked at it, and something inside her hardened at once. She had seen enough envelopes passed across tables in her life. From social workers, from foster families, from people who wanted to bring something to a quick end. "I didn't help her because of this," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "I won't take it. Open it first." "Sir, I don't. Miss Marsh." He didn't raise his voice. He hadn't raised it once. "Open it." Delaney reached out and lifted the flap. There was no money inside. There was a printed document bearing an official seal and a signature, and on the third line from the top was the name Trent Novak. She read it all the way through. Then she began again, more slowly, because she hadn't understood it the first time. It was a notice confirming that the loan had been paid in full and was no longer in effect. $40,000. The number that had sat inside her desk drawer for 18 months. The number that had driven her to take a third weekend shift. The number she had never told anyone about, not even Hattie. It had vanished on a single sheet of A4 paper she was holding in her hands. "How did you know?" she asked. Massimo looked at her. "I know about every debt in this city, even the ones that don't belong to you." Delaney set the document on the table. She pushed it back toward him. "I can't accept it." Rosaria gave a soft cry. Massimo showed no reaction. He merely tilted his head the slightest bit, the way a man might when confronted with a fact that hadn't appeared in his calculations. "You understand what this document is, don't you?" "I do." "Then why?" "Because it's my debt." She lifted her eyes and looked directly at him for the first time. "My husband's name is on it, but I'm the one paying it. I've been paying it for a year and a half, and I'll keep paying it. If I let you pay it for me today, then the 30 seconds I spent helping your mother that day will become something with a price. And that isn't something I'm willing to sell." The only sound left in the room was the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Massimo Vitale watched her for a long time. Rosaria was the one who finally broke the silence. She placed a hand on Delaney's knee and asked in a very gentle voice, "Delaney, that man sitting at the counter in the diner the other morning, what did he say to you?" Delaney spun toward her, the color drained from her face. "How did you know?" The old woman didn't answer. She only took Delaney's hand. And Delaney, who had just refused $40,000 without blinking, suddenly felt her throat close. "He knew what time my little girl gets out of school," she said. "He knew which gate she uses. He said the weather was turning cold and told me to make sure she wore an extra coat." Massimo and his mother exchanged a glance. Just one glance, brief and silent. "She needs someone by her side," he said, turning back to Delaney. "My mother is 76. and she refuses to stay home. I need someone to accompany her, eat with her, and stay here overnight during the week. The salary is 3 times what you earn now, from all 3 jobs combined. You'll quit the other 2. Are you paying me to accept that document another way? No, his answer came at once. I'm hiring someone. If you can't do the job, I'll dismiss you just as I would anyone else. Delaney fell silent. She thought of the inhaler that was only 1/3 full. She thought of the man in the gray suit. She thought about the way she had stood at the Salem Street school gate for 3 afternoons in a row and looked over her shoulder every single time. Then she rose. I'll take the job, she said, but I have one condition. Rosaria looked up. Massimo said nothing. He waited. My daughter will never set foot inside this house, Delaney said. She'll stay with Hattie in the rooms above the diner. I'll work here all week, and I'll go home to her on weekends. She won't come here, she won't know where this place is, and she won't know whose house this is, ever. You think she'd be in danger here. I think you know better than I do whether she would be. Rosaria opened her mouth to say something, but Massimo raised a hand, and she fell silent. He studied the young woman standing before him. She barely reached his shoulder and wore a sweater worn thin at the elbows. She had just refused an amount of money greater than everything she had earned in 3 years, and now she was laying down conditions for a man no one in the entire North End dared place conditions upon. He nodded. Agreed. Delaney let out the breath she had been holding, but she didn't notice the detail she should have noticed. Massimo picked up the loan release from the table, folded it, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. He didn't tear it up. He didn't destroy it. That night, the document lay locked inside the right-hand drawer of his desk beside the thin folder bearing her name, and it would remain there, untouched, for exactly 3 weeks. Delaney began work on Monday morning. The job wasn't as demanding as she had expected. She woke at 6, made tea for Rosaria, walked 1 circuit of the garden behind the house with her, reminded her to take her blood pressure medicine at 7 o'clock and her heart medicine at 11 o'clock. In the afternoons, Rosaria often sat knitting in the living room and made Delaney sit beside her, not to do anything, but simply to talk. She talked a great deal. About Naples, about summers so hot the asphalt melted, about coming to America at 19 with 2 suitcases and not knowing a single word of English. Delaney listened. She had always been more accustomed to listening than speaking. It wasn't until the 3rd day that she noticed the tray. It sat on the floor of the 2nd-floor hallway, directly outside a closed door at the far end. On the tray was a plate of chicken and rice, a glass of orange juice, and a neatly folded napkin. She passed it at 9 o'clock that morning, while taking clean towels to Rosaria's room, and she assumed someone had just set it down. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, she walked past again. The tray was still there. The food remained untouched. Not a single drop of orange juice was gone. No one had unfolded the napkin. On the 4th day, she saw exactly the same thing. The food was different, and so was the tray. But everything remained untouched. A thin line of light still spilled from beneath the door, which meant someone was inside, and that person was awake. That afternoon, while the 2 of them sat on the porch, Delaney asked about it. She spoke very cautiously, in the voice of someone who knew she was touching a place she wasn't supposed to touch. Ma'am, that room at the end of the upstairs hallway? Rosaria's knitting needles stopped. She didn't look up right away. She stared down at the strands of yarn in her lap for so long that Delaney was about to apologize and withdraw the question. My granddaughter, she said softly. Her name is Bianca. She's 7 years old. I see. She hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years. Delaney remained silent. Her mother left. The old woman began knitting again, but her stitches had slowed considerably. She signed the papers and left, went to Milan. Didn't take the child with her, and never came back. That day, Bianca stood at the 2nd-floor window and watched the car drive through the gates. Then she went up to her room. Rosaria paused. She hasn't spoken a word since. Has anyone? Has a doctor seen her? 3 of them. Rosaria laughed, but there was no joy in it. Massimo brought all 3 of them to the house, the best in the state. They sat with her, asked her questions, and gave her pictures to draw. The child didn't speak. Then she stopped leaving her room altogether. What about food? At night, when everyone in the house is asleep, she goes down to the kitchen and gets something. Teresa always leaves food waiting in the refrigerator. The old woman lowered her knitting needles. The tray outside her door is Massimo's doing. Every day, he tells someone to prepare a tray and leave it there. It's been 2 years. The child hasn't touched it once. Delaney looked out at the garden. She thought of the man standing outside that door without opening it, and she understood that there were things money couldn't buy, even for a man who could erase a $40,000 debt with a single sheet of paper. That evening, she went upstairs at nearly 9 o'clock. A fresh tray had been set outside the door. Delaney didn't knock. She didn't call the child's name or speak a single word through the door. She knew all too well what it felt like to have adults standing outside, asking questions in those gentle voices. She had lived in 4 different foster homes, where someone was always trying to make her open the door and tell them everything. She sat down on the final stair at the end of the hallway, tore a corner from the medication notebook in her apron pocket, and took out a pen. She drew a rabbit. She drew it terribly, with 2 uneven ears, one eye larger than the other, and an absurdly round belly. It looked like the old stuffed rabbit her daughter still held when she slept. They were alike because both were misshapen, and both were worn thin with age. Delaney didn't write a single word. No name, no greeting, no question. She folded the scrap of paper in half, placed it on the edge of the tray beside the napkin, and went downstairs. The next morning, Delaney went up to the 2nd floor at 7 o'clock. The tray was still exactly where it had been. The food was untouched, the glass of water was still full, and the napkin remained neatly folded, unopened. But the scrap of paper was gone. Delaney stood there for a moment. Then she bent down, picked up the tray as she did every day, carried it to the kitchen, emptied the plate of cold food into the trash, and told no one what had happened. That evening, she drew another rabbit. The woman arrived on Friday afternoon without warning, and no one at the gate asked her a single question. She entered the house the way people enter a place they've been coming and going from for 20 years, slipping off her coat and handing it to a maid without looking to see whether anyone was there to take it, then walking straight into the living room. Her hair was a deep shade of red, cut to her shoulders. In her hand was a bottle of wine wrapped in tissue paper. "Rosaria," she called, and her voice warmed at once. "My father sent you this bottle. He said you like wine from Piedmont." "Francesca." The old woman set down her knitting needles. "It's been far too long since you came to see me." Delaney was rearranging several balls of yarn in the corner of the room. She rose, gave a small nod of greeting, and was about to excuse herself. "Who are you?" Francesca asked. There was nothing sharp in her voice, nothing cold. It was only an ordinary question accompanied by an ordinary smile. "I'm Delaney. I take care of Rosaria." "Ah, the new one." She nodded thoughtfully. "My father mentioned you." "Sit down." "Why are you standing there?" "No, thank you, Sit." Francesca had already taken 3 glasses from the cabinet herself. She opened the bottle, poured 1 glass for Rosaria, 1 for herself, then filled the 3rd and pushed it toward Delaney. "It's only 1 glass. Everyone in this house takes everything far too seriously." Delaney picked up the wine because she didn't know how to refuse. She sat on the edge of the chair with her back straight, and over the next 40 minutes, she said more than she had said throughout the entire week before. Because Francesca Lombardi was very good at asking questions. She asked where Delaney was from, and when she heard Lowell, she exclaimed that she had a friend who lived there too. She asked where Delaney had worked before, and when she heard that Delaney had held 3 jobs at once, she shook her head and said women had it so hard these days, and she couldn't understand why men kept leaving everything for women to carry. Her questions came so naturally, woven between remarks about the weather, a new restaurant that had opened in Back Bay, and how Rosaria ought to change her sleeping medication. "Do you have children?" "Yes, I have a daughter." "Oh, how old is she?" 6. 6 is the loveliest age. Francesca placed a hand against her chest, her eyes brightening. She must be in 1st grade then. "Which school?" "Just the public school near the diner. Salem Street School." "That's a good school. I know the principal." She took a sip of wine. "And what about her father? Does he help much?" Delaney was silent for a beat. "He left." "For good?" "Yes, a 1.5 years ago." "Oh my God." Francesca set down her glass, reached across, and gently touched Delaney's knee. "I'm sorry. That was such an insensitive question." "It's all right. Raising a child alone in this city. You're remarkable." She said it with such sincerity that Delaney felt a sting behind her nose. It had been a very long time since anyone had said anything like that to her. Hattie cared for her, but she never put such things into words. Yet here, In this warm room, with a glass of wine in her hand, a beautifully dressed woman was looking at her and telling her she was remarkable. Delaney told her more. She told her that the little girl had suffered from asthma since she was very young, that she stayed with Hattie during the week, and that every weekend mother and daughter walked down to the harbor so she could watch the ships. Francesca nodded at every sentence, asked another question at exactly the right moment, and laughed in exactly the right places. At 6 o'clock, she rose. "I have to go. Be sure to try the wine." She kissed Rosaria on the cheek, slipped on her coat, and at the door, she turned to look at Delaney one last time. "It was very nice meeting you, Delaney." The door closed behind her. Rosaria sat motionless in her chair, staring after her, and said nothing. Then she spoke a single sentence, so quietly that Delaney had to ask her to repeat it. "You told her too much." At 11 o'clock that night, inside a car parked in the lot of a waterfront restaurant, Francesca Lombardi took out her phone and dialed a number that wasn't saved under any name. The person on the other end answered after the fourth ring. "It's me," she said. "That girl from the diner. She's inside the house now." Silence answered her. "Do you have a pen?" Francesca asked. "I've got a few interesting things for you." Delaney went down to the kitchen at nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, because Rosaria had stirred in her sleep and said she was thirsty. The entire house was dark, except for the small light above the refrigerator and a strip of yellow light spilling from the upstairs hallway. She poured water into a glass, set it on a tray, and was about to go back upstairs when she heard the bolt on the back door slide open. She stood perfectly still. Only 3 people ever used the back door of this house. Massimo stepped inside. He didn't turn on the light. He took off his overcoat, draped it over the back of a chair, and walked straight to the sink. It wasn't until he stood beneath the dim glow of the refrigerator light that Delaney saw the stains on both cuffs of his white shirt. She didn't cry out. She didn't step back. She simply remained where she was, still holding the tray in both hands, her heart pounding hard. Massimo turned his head. He had known someone was in the kitchen from the moment he walked in, and now he was merely confirming who it was. "You're still awake." Rosaria was thirsty. He gave a single nod. Then he turned on the faucet, kept the stream low, and began washing his hands. He washed them for a long time, carefully and thoroughly, without saying a word. Delaney remained where she was. She should have left. She should have carried the tray of water upstairs, closed the door behind her, and pretended she had never come down to the kitchen that night. That was what everyone else in this house would have done. But her feet didn't move. Massimo turned off the water. He reached for the towel hanging beside the sink, dried his hands, and turned fully toward her. "What did you see?" he asked. The question was spoken very softly. But Delaney understood at once that it wasn't really a question. It was a door opening in 2 directions, and she had to choose which side she would step through. She thought of Hattie pulling her back by the arm outside the diner. She thought of the 2 men standing at the top of the stairs. She thought of how she had survived 27 years by seeing everything and telling no one. "I saw a man who needs to change his shirt," she said. Massimo's hand went still against the towel. He looked at her. The kitchen was so quiet that she could hear the refrigerator humming. Then one corner of his mouth lifted. 1 millimeter, no more, and it vanished at once, so quickly that Delaney would have missed it if she had blinked. But she didn't blink. "You're right," he said. He began unfastening his cuffs. "Is there any coffee left? I'll make some." "There's no need. It'll only take a minute." She set the tray on the table and moved toward the stove before he could say anything else. She took out the coffee filter and the ground coffee from the tin, doing everything with the same practiced movements that 4 years behind the counter at Doyle's had taught her hands. Massimo sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't go upstairs to change his shirt. He simply sat there, his stained sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching her work. "You've been here 10 days, he said. "Yes." "Is my mother sleeping better?" "She wakes less often. She used to wake 3 times a night. Now it's only once." "Why?" "I changed the time she takes her heart medicine to after dinner, and I stopped giving her afternoon tea and replaced it with warm water." Massimo looked at her. "Did the doctor tell you to do that?" "No. It was only a guess. I used to work night shifts at a nursing home before I started at the diner." She poured the coffee into a cup and placed it in front of him. "If I'm wrong, just tell me, and I'll change it back." He didn't touch the coffee right away. He looked at the cup, then at her. "Are you afraid of me, Miss Marsh?" Delaney thought for a moment. She truly considered the question instead of offering the first answer that came to mind. "Yes," she said, "but I'm afraid of a great many things. That doesn't stop me from doing my job." This time, Massimo didn't smile, not even by a millimeter. He picked up the cup and took a sip. "It's late. Take the water upstairs to my mother." "Yes." She lifted the tray and walked toward the kitchen door. When she reached the threshold, he called after her. "Miss Marsh." She stopped. "You didn't come down to the kitchen tonight," he said. Delaney nodded and went upstairs. She walked through the second-floor hallway, past the closed door at the far end, and on the tray resting on the floor there was still a folded scrap of paper she had left at 9 o'clock that evening. By the next morning, it was gone. The phone vibrated on the nightstand at 10 minutes to 2. Delaney woke before the second vibration, because a single mother slept differently from other people. Hattie's name was on the screen. Hattie? Delaney. Hattie's voice was trembling. Delaney had never heard her tremble before. "She's having an attack. I used the inhaler, but it didn't help. I gave her 2 puffs, sweetheart. I've called an ambulance. They're coming up the stairs now." Delaney bolted upright. "Where are they taking her?" "General Hospital." "Sweetheart, I'm sorry, Get in the ambulance with her. Don't let her be alone." She hung up. She didn't remember how she put on her coat, or how many steps it took her to get downstairs. All she remembered was the dark hallway, the sound of her feet striking the wooden floor, and the single thought inside her head. The inhaler had been 1/3 full. She had seen that it was 1/3 full, and she had left it that way because she wouldn't be paid until the following week. She opened the front door and ran out onto the steps. In the courtyard, the car's lights were already on. Massimo stood at the front of the car with the keys in his hand, an overcoat hastily thrown over his dress shirt. His room was directly beside hers. He had heard the phone ring. "Get in." "You don't have to. Get in the car, Miss Marsh." He drove himself. He didn't call a chauffeur or ask anyone to come with them. The car raced down Beacon Hill, and at the second turn, he pressed a number on the center screen. The phone rang exactly once. "This is Vitali," he said. "A 6-year-old girl is on her way to you. Asthma. The ambulance is coming from the north end. I need your people waiting at the entrance when it arrives. Not after it arrives." He listened for 3 seconds, then ended the call. Not a single unnecessary word. No thank you. No goodbye. Delaney sat in the passenger seat with her hands clenched tightly together in her lap, staring straight ahead. "I left the inhaler when it was still 1/3 full," she said. She wasn't speaking to anyone. "I knew it was still 1/3 full." Massimo didn't answer. He only pressed harder on the accelerator. By the time they arrived, the ambulance was already there. The emergency room doors were standing open, and 3 people in white coats were waiting exactly as he had ordered. Delaney ran inside. She saw Hattie standing in the hallway, her hair disheveled, still wearing her nightgown beneath a cardigan. She saw a door beginning to close. Then she was no longer allowed to follow. "Please wait out here," a nurse said. "The doctor is treating her. I'll come out and update you as soon as I know anything." The door closed completely. Delaney sat down in a plastic chair in the hallway. Hattie sat beside her, took her hand, and began to cry. Delaney didn't cry. She sat with her back straight and her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes fixed on that door without looking away for a single second. She sat that way for 40 minutes. Then an hour. Then an hour and a half. The hallway lights were white and cold, and the air smelled of antiseptic. Now and then, the sound of a gurney rolling past came from the far end. Massimo didn't sit down. He stood leaning against the opposite wall with both hands in his coat pockets, and he never took his eyes from that door either. Close to 4 o'clock in the morning, Hattie drifted to sleep in her chair. Delaney began to tremble. It wasn't the trembling that came with tears. It was the trembling of a body that had been held rigid for too many hours, the kind a person couldn't control. Her shoulders shook in waves. Massimo pushed away from the wall. He walked over, removed his black overcoat, and draped it around her shoulders. Delaney looked up. She opened her mouth to thank him, but a different question came out instead. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer at once. He looked toward the closed door at the end of the hallway, the door that had left a mother standing outside. "Because her mother stopped in the rain for mine," he said. Then he turned away, walked to the far end of the hallway, and stood there with his back to her, allowing her to cry alone where no one could see. The sky still wasn't fully light when the door opened. The doctor stepped out and pulled down his mask. Are you her mother? Yes, she's stable now. We stopped the bronchial spasm, and her oxygen level returned to normal half an hour ago. He glanced down at the paper in his hand. We're keeping her here for observation until this afternoon, but you can rest easy. She's through the worst of it. Delaney rose to her feet. Her legs buckled beneath her for half a step, and she had to catch hold of the chair. Is she asleep? She is. You can go in, but don't wake her. Delaney nodded. She nodded 4 or 5 times in a row, and it took her several moments before she could finally say the words thank you. At the far end of the hallway, Massimo turned around. He didn't walk toward her. He merely watched her standing there with his oversized overcoat draped around her shoulders, wiping her face with the sleeve before entering her daughter's room. Then he took out his phone and sent Gianni a single line. That morning, at the Charlestown docks, a man was invited to meet with him. At 10 o'clock that morning, the sky over Charlestown Harbor was gray, and the wind cut sideways across the frigid water. Massimo stepped out of the car in front of warehouse number 4. He hadn't slept at all. He was still wearing the same shirt he'd worn the night before, the cuffs still buttoned, and none of the 4 men waiting by the door dared look him directly in the face. Gianni walked beside him, carrying a thin stack of papers. 3 containers were detained on Tuesday, he said quietly. Customs knew when the ship would dock. They knew 3 hours in advance. Only 7 people had that information. 6, Massimo said. I removed Ferrante from the list last week. Gianni nodded. 6 people. I've checked 5. There's 1 left. The warehouse was cold and cavernous inside, and the sound of their footsteps echoed all the way up to the corrugated metal roof. In the center of the empty space, a man sat on an iron chair. He was around 30, dressed in a work jacket, and trying to keep his knees from trembling. Massimo stopped 3 steps away. He didn't sit. He didn't remove his overcoat. He didn't say any of the things a man in his position would usually say at a moment like this. He simply looked down at him. How long have you worked for me? 6 years, sir. 6 years. Massimo nodded slowly. Your wife gave birth to your 2nd child last month, didn't she? The man swallowed hard. Yes, sir. I sent an envelope. You did. Thank you, sir. Then I'm going to ask you exactly 1 question, Massimo said. You'll answer it once. After that, I won't ask again. No one in the warehouse moved. The wind slipped through the gaps around the rolling door, making a long, shrill sound. Who paid you? The man lowered his head. He sat like that for 10 seconds. Then he spoke very quickly, as if speaking slowly would keep the words from coming out at all. I don't know their name, sir. The money came through a company account. I swear to you, I don't know what anyone looks like. The company's name. Harborline Consulting. He looked up. Harborline Consulting Group. The address is in Quincy. I kept the messages. All of them. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Sir, I. Massimo raised 1 hand. The man fell silent. Massimo turned to Gianni. Did you get that? Yes. He looked at the man in the iron chair 1 final time. There was nothing on his face. No anger, no contempt, no pity. It was the face of a man who had just finished reading a line in a ledger and was preparing to turn the page. Then he turned his back and walked toward the door. As he went, he adjusted his left cuff, pulled it smooth, and refastened the button that had slipped slightly out of place. Gianni followed 3 steps behind him. At the threshold, he stopped and reached for the iron door. The door closed. Massimo stood outside in the yard with his face turned toward the water, and he didn't look back once. 4 minutes later, Gianni came out, adjusting the collar of his coat. Harborline, he said. I've never heard that name before. Neither have I. Massimo looked across the bay. That's the problem. What do you want me to do? Trace the account backward. Find out whose name is on it, who signs the papers, who files the taxes, and who rents the office in Quincy. If it's a shell company, then somewhere there has to be a real person signing real documents. He turned and looked at Gianni. And you'll do it alone. Don't hand it off to anyone. Don't mention its name inside the house. Not even to Ferrante? Massimo was silent for several seconds. Especially not to Ferrante. Gianni nodded. He'd worked for this family for 19 years. And he understood that when Massimo Vitale began removing a name from every conversation, that name had entered a different kind of list. There's one more thing, Gianni said as they reached the car. Miss Lombardi came to the house yesterday. I know. She stayed for 40 minutes. I know. Massimo opened the car door. My mother told me. He settled into the back seat and looked through the window at the cranes turning slowly against the gray sky. He thought of two names. One was Harborline. The other, he hadn't yet allowed himself to say aloud, not even inside his own mind. What Massimo Vitale didn't know that morning was that, in the end, both names would lead back to the same person. Rosaria insisted on going. She said it was a fundraiser for the children's hospital that she had attended for 23 years in a row, that her husband had once attended it with her, and that she had never missed a single year. Massimo objected. The old woman rose from her chair with the help of her cane and told him that if he wouldn't let her go, she would call a taxi herself, and that was the end of the matter. "Delaney will come with me," she said. "I need someone to steady me." Delaney borrowed a dress from Hattie's niece. It was dark blue, a little loose around the waist, old but clean. She stood in front of the mirror in the second-floor bathroom for a long time, looking at herself, then reminded herself that she was going there to work, not to attend a party. That made it a little easier to breathe. The hotel ballroom in Back Bay had crystal chandeliers and 200 guests. Delaney walked on Rosaria's left, supporting her beneath the elbow, and said almost nothing for an entire hour. She escorted Rosaria from table to table, stepped half a pace back whenever someone came over to greet her, handed her a glass of water when she needed one, and reminded her to sit whenever she had been standing too long. It was her job, and she did it well. People looked at her. She knew they did. Some glances drifted down to her shoes. Quiet questions followed behind her, asking who she was. She had been accustomed to that for a very long time, so accustomed that it no longer hurt. Close to 9 o'clock, Francesca Lombardi approached them. "Rosaria!" She kissed the old woman on the cheek. Then she turned to Delaney, and her smile was every bit as warm as it had been that afternoon in the living room. "You came too. Lovely dress." "Thank you. Have you had anything to drink? Here, hold this for me." Francesca extended a glass of red wine toward her. Delaney reached out to take it, and at the exact moment their hands were about to meet, Francesca turned her wrist at the slightest angle, so slight that no one among the 200 people in the room could have seen it. The wine spilled, streaming down the dark blue dress and spreading into a wide stain from her waist to her knees. Delaney stood frozen. "Oh my God," Francesca cried, stepping back and raising both hands to cover her mouth. "I'm so sorry. Are you all right? You startled me." People nearby turned to look. Someone laughed. Then the laughter spread, to 2 people, then 5, then an entire corner of the room. It wasn't the loud, openly cruel kind of laughter. It was worse. It was soft and polite, hidden behind raised hands, the kind of laughter shared by people who had just seen something where it didn't belong and found the sight amusing. Delaney looked down at the wine staining her dress. She heard her own voice saying that she was sorry and would step outside for a moment. She heard Rosaria call her name. Then she walked away. She moved through the crowd, through all those watching eyes, pushed open the glass door at the far end of the ballroom, and stepped onto the terrace. The air outside was cold and dark, with only a few small lanterns hanging along the railing. Delaney stood gripping the rail with her back to the door and forced herself to breathe evenly. She was 27 years old. People had been looking at her that way since she was 6, when a social worker had led her into a new classroom halfway through the school year with her clothes stuffed inside a plastic bag. She had thought she was used to it. It turned out she wasn't. The glass door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll go back inside now." Massimo said nothing. He didn't ask whether she was all right. He didn't tell her it was no great matter. He didn't say any of the things people usually said. He walked over, stopped beside her, and held out his hand. "The music is still playing," he said. Delaney turned to look at him. "Sir, give me your hand." She looked down at the wine stain on her dress. "I can't go in looking like this." "Miss Marsh." He kept his hand extended. "Give me your hand." She placed her hand in his. Massimo turned and led her straight through the glass door, back into the ballroom, beneath the chandeliers and before 200 people. He didn't circle around the edge of the room. He walked directly to the center of the dance floor. The conversations gradually died away. They didn't stop all at once. They faded in waves, spreading from one part of the room to the next, as heads turned in their direction. The music kept playing. Massimo placed one hand at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them, and began to move. Delaney didn't know how to dance. Her feet tangled together on the second beat. "Look at me," he said softly. Don't look down. She raised her eyes, and they danced through the entire song in the middle of a room that had fallen completely silent, the dark red wine stain still vivid against the faded blue fabric of her dress. No one laughed anymore. In one corner, a silver-haired man held a glass of wine and forgot to drink from it. In another, Francesca Lombardi stood rooted to the floor, the smile still fixed on her face, though her fingertips were gripping the stem of her glass so tightly that they had turned white. Because in 20 years, no one in this city had ever seen Massimo Vitale hold anyone's hand. Rosaria sat at her table, with both hands resting on the head of her cane, unable to hide her tears. The music ended. Massimo released Delaney's hand, stepped half a pace back, and inclined his head in one small bow before turning away. He explained nothing to anyone. He didn't need to, but when Delaney went down to the parking garage 15 minutes later to retrieve Rosaria's coat, someone was already waiting for her. Delaney went looking for the coat check room to retrieve Rosaria's coat. She took a wrong turn and entered a hallway behind the ballroom, where there was only a single wall lamp and the music sounded very far away. Massimo was standing there. He held his phone in one hand, but the screen had gone dark. He watched her approach, and she stopped 2 steps away from him. "I'm getting Rosaria's coat. The coat check room is on the other side." "Yes, sir." She meant to turn away. She didn't. The two of them stood beneath that murky yellow light, and they both knew they had remained there longer than necessary. "I haven't thanked you yet," she said. "You don't need to. You did that in front of all those people." "I know what I did. Why did you do it?" Massimo looked at her. He didn't answer the question. He took 1 step closer, raised his hand, and brushed aside a strand of hair that had fallen across her forehead. His hand lingered there, beside her cheekbone. Delaney didn't move away. He bent down and kissed her. The kiss was brief, and it was nothing like anything she had imagined from a man like him. It was very gentle. It was almost a question. When he drew back, she remained where she was, one hand braced against the wall. Delaney. It was the first time he had called her by her name instead of Miss Marsh. The music in the ballroom changed to another song. Footsteps sounded at the far end of the hallway, and Massimo stepped back half a pace, his face returning to what it had always been in less than a second. "Go get the coat," he said. "I'll take my mother home first." She nodded and walked away. She didn't realize her hands were trembling until she reached the end of the hallway. 15 minutes later, Delaney entered the underground parking garage, with Rosaria's coat draped over her arm. It was cold down there, the lights were white, and every footstep echoed against the concrete ceiling. Francesca Lombardi stood, leaning against a pillar, directly in the path Delaney had to take. She was smoking. When she saw Delaney, she made no attempt to hide the cigarette. "You dance beautifully," Francesca said. "Please excuse me. I need to get through. I'm not stopping you." Francesca flicked ash onto the floor. "I only want to ask you one question. Then I'll let you go." Delaney stopped. "Do you know why his former wife left him?" Francesca asked. Delaney didn't answer. Her name was Camille. I'd known her since the wedding. Beautiful, educated in Europe, from a respectable family. Francesca took a long drag from her cigarette. She truly loved him. The first 3 years were good. Then she started counting. Counting what? The nights he came home after 2 o'clock in the morning. The times people came to the house, and no one explained who they were. The names that vanished from the dinner table and were never spoken again. She looked at Delaney through the smoke. Then one day, she had counted enough. She signed the papers, called a taxi, and left. She even abandoned her own child. Do you understand? How frightened does a woman have to be before she can leave her own child behind? Delaney tightened her grip on the coat in her hands. "She isn't me." "No." Francesca nodded. "You're worse off than she was. At least she had somewhere to run back to. What do you have?" She slowly crushed the cigarette against the pillar. "You have a 6-year-old daughter with asthma living above a diner. Are you planning to let her grow up near that house?" Delaney opened her mouth. Nothing came out, because that was the exact question she had been asking herself for the past 3 weeks. She had asked it while standing in the kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning, staring at those stained cuffs. She had asked it while walking past the 2 men at the top of the stairs. She had asked it inside the ambulance, in the hospital hallway, and on every Sunday afternoon when she sat beside her daughter at the harbor, knowing that on Monday morning she would climb into that black car again. She had asked herself over and over, and she had never been able to answer. "Please excuse me," she said. Francesca stepped politely aside and watched her walk toward the elevator. "Delaney," she called after her. "He truly is good to you. I won't deny that. But there's something you should know." Delaney stopped but didn't turn around. "In that house, no one ever throws anyone out," Francesca said. "They simply stop protecting them." Delaney returned to her room close to 1 o'clock that night. She hung the wine-stained dress in the closet without washing it. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, took out her notebook, tore off one corner of a page, and drew another rabbit. But this time, her hand remained still for a very long time before she folded the scrap of paper in half. Aldo Ferrante arrived on Wednesday carrying a file and wearing the expression of a man who had been forced to do something he didn't want to do. "I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks, he said as he placed the file on the desk. "I kept thinking I was wrong. I hoped I was wrong." Massimo didn't touch it. "Tell me, do you remember the debt cancellation paper you gave the girl?" "I remember. She was right not to accept it." Aldo pulled out a chair and sat down without waiting to be invited. "But it wasn't because of pride, Massimo. It was because if she accepted it, the debt would disappear. And she needed that debt to remain exactly as it was." Massimo looked at him. "The following week, she came to see me." Aldo opened the file and turned to the first page. "She knew I was the lender. She met me at a coffee shop outside Quincy and named her price. She told me to leave the debt untouched, not to cancel it, and to pay her $25,000 in cash. Then, if you ever asked, she would still be in debt, still suffering, still someone to pity." He pushed the paper across the desk. "This is a copy of the promissory note. It's still valid. It hasn't been canceled." Then came the second page. "This is the transfer order, $25,000, dated the 14th. Then the third page. It was a photograph taken from a distance through the coffee shop window. Aldo sat on one side of the table. Delaney sat across from him, wearing the sweater worn thin at the elbows, both hands resting on the table as she said something. "I'm not proud of this," Aldo said. I agreed because I wanted to see how far she intended to take it. In the study, the pendulum clock in the hallway chimed 5 times. Massimo reached for the drawer on the right side of his desk, unlocked it, and removed a white envelope. He placed it on the desk beside the file. It had been lying there for 3 weeks, folded in half and untouched. He summoned her at 7 o'clock that evening. Delaney stepped into the study and knew at once that something was wrong. Over the past 3 weeks, she had learned how to read that room. She had learned how to read the set of his back when he sat facing the window. "Sit down." She sat. Massimo turned his chair around. He didn't look at her immediately. He picked up the first page, glanced over it, then laid it in front of her. "Your promissory note. It hasn't been canceled." Delaney looked down. "Yes, sir, because I—" He picked up the second page and placed it beside the first. "A transfer order for $25,000, dated the 14th of last month." She looked up. "What?" He lifted the photograph and set it down. "A coffee shop outside Quincy." Delaney stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she began to speak, and she spoke quickly, far too quickly, with the desperate speed of someone who knew she was losing her footing. "He asked me to meet him. I didn't go looking for him. He sent me a message through Hattie's number. He said that if I didn't come—" She stopped. "He mentioned my daughter. That's why I went. I sat there for 15 minutes. I didn't accept anything. I left right away." "You didn't accept anything?" "No, sir." "Then where is the $25,000? "I don't know. Do you have a bank account?" "One. At the community bank on Hanover Street." "What's the balance?" Delaney was silent for a moment. $312. Massimo nodded. "Then the money went into another account." "I don't have another account." "Miss Marsh." He spoke her name the way he used to. "Miss Marsh." "Not Delaney. I gave you a paper that erased your entire debt. You refused it. You told me you weren't selling 30 seconds of your time. I believed you. I believed you enough to leave that paper in my drawer for 3 weeks, because I thought that perhaps one day you might change your mind, and I didn't want you to have to ask." He placed the white envelope on the desk between them. "Then you went to one of my men. You left the debt intact. You took the cash." His voice never rose. It remained even, slow, each word distinct, like a man reading a sentence rather than making an accusation. "You refused to let me erase the debt. Then you took cash from one of my men. Then you came into my home, stayed beside my mother every day, and stood outside my daughter's room every night." For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. How much were you planning to take before you stopped? Delaney sat perfectly still. You believe him. He has been with my family for 20 years. And I've been here for 3 weeks. Yes. She nodded slowly. Something inside her had just collapsed without making a sound, like a door quietly closing on the floor below. There's nothing I can say that would make you believe me, is there? You can speak. No. She rose to her feet. Because you've already decided. I know that look. I've seen it in 4 different houses, sir. People don't argue with me. They simply call social services. Massimo said nothing. You know every debt in this city, Delaney said. You know how much I owe, who I owe, and the date the debt began, but you don't know how to read a human being. She pushed the photograph back toward him, not hard. Please excuse me. I'll leave tonight. She reached the door. Please don't dismiss Teresa, she said without turning around. She takes her heart medication after dinner. Not before. I wrote it in the notebook inside the kitchen desk drawer. Then she left. Massimo remained in the study. He didn't stand. He didn't call anyone. He sat staring at the 3 pages on his desk for a long time, and at last he picked up the white envelope, folded it again, returned it to the drawer, and locked it as before. Everything in Delaney's room fit into a single bag. She finished packing in 11 minutes. On the small table beside the window lay a scrap of paper folded in half, the drawing she had made the night before, and hadn't yet had the chance to take upstairs. Delaney picked it up. She stood there holding the scrap in her hand and looking toward the hallway. Then she placed it back on the table, slung the bag over her shoulder, and walked downstairs. It was bitterly cold that night. No one came to see her out through the gate. Delaney arrived at Doyle's at 5:40 the next morning. Hattie was turning on the stove. She looked at Delaney, then at the canvas bag resting at the foot of the stairs, and didn't ask a single question. Your apron is hanging where it always was, she said. By noon, she had called Hallmark Cleaning and gotten Delaney's night shift back. That afternoon, she called the laundry in Chelsea. All 3 shifts returned exactly as they had been, as though the past 3 weeks had been nothing more than an afternoon nap that had lasted a little too long. That evening, when Delaney came home, there were 3 plates on the table instead of 2. Hattie sat down, ladled soup into Poppy's bowl, then served Delaney. She didn't ask why Delaney had come back. She didn't ask what anyone had said to her. She simply pushed the plate of bread toward her and said that the weather would turn colder tomorrow, so she should remember to wear another layer. Delaney ate everything. Then, she washed the dishes, wiped down the stove, and went upstairs to change for her night shift. She did it all so normally that Hattie had to turn her face toward the stove so Delaney wouldn't see. For 3 days, Delaney didn't mention a single name. But every night, after she finished cleaning the 9th floor of the building on Congress Street, she sat beside the hallway window for 10 minutes. From there, she could look toward Beacon Hill. 3 miles away, the tray was still set outside the door every evening. On the first day, Teresa carried it downstairs untouched. On the second day, it was untouched again. On the third day, she carried it down and stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time before throwing the food away. The little girl doesn't come out for her evening food anymore, she told Rosaria. The refrigerator looked exactly the same this morning as it did last night. Rosaria set down her teacup. She rose with the help of her cane, walked into the hallway, climbed the stairs 1 step at a time, and stood for a long while before the closed door at the end of the corridor. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She merely stood there with one hand pressed against the wall, breathing. Then she went downstairs and walked straight into her son's study. Massimo sat behind his desk with 3 open files before him. He didn't look up. Go get some rest, Mother. It's late. Did you send her away? I didn't send anyone away. She left on her own. Why? It was a business matter. Massimo. The old woman approached the desk. Look at me. He raised his eyes. That girl washed me when I had a fever. She slept sitting upright in a chair beside my bed for 3 nights. She knows what time I take my medicine. She knows I'm afraid of the stairs. She knows I don't like anyone calling me the lady of the house. Her voice began to tremble. She was here for 3 weeks, and she never asked me a single question about money. Not one. You don't know everything that happened. I know enough. There are documents, Mother. Documents. Rosaria laughed, a short, bitter sound. Your father had documents too. Massimo fell silent. In '78, he had a friend named Salvatore, a man who had been beside him since they were both carrying crates at the fish market. Someone brought him documents. They told him Salvatore had betrayed him. She placed both hands on the head of her cane. Your father didn't shout. He sat in silence, just as you're sitting now. Then he told Salvatore to leave Boston, and he never spoke that name again. And then what happened? 6 years later, they discovered who had done it. Rosaria looked directly into her son's eyes. It wasn't Salvatore, but Salvatore had died in Providence 2 years earlier. Your father learned the news on a Saturday morning. He was sitting in the very chair you're sitting in now. The only sound left in the room was the pendulum clock in the hallway. Why do you think he never opened the drawer on the left? She said. Your father drove a good man from his door, and then he died in this room, alone. She turned to leave. At the threshold, she stopped. Your daughter hasn't eaten in 3 days, she said. Go upstairs and look at the tray. The door closed. Massimo remained still for a very long time. Then he reached for the telephone and called Gianni. How far have you gotten with Harbor Line? I'm nearly there, sir. I need 2 more days. You have 1. Gianni Sarno took 19 hours instead of 2 days. He arrived the following afternoon without removing his coat and placed a stack of papers on the desk, thicker than anything he had ever brought into that room. Harbor Line Consulting Group, he said. Registered in Delaware, with a rented office in Quincy. 1 room measuring 18 square meters and no employees. The director listed on the documents is a 72-year-old man from Braintree, who's paid $400 a month to sign his name. Massimo opened the file. The authorized signatory on the account is an attorney named Whitmore. It took me 10 hours to find out who pays Whitmore. Gianni placed his finger on a line on the 4th page. Here. Massimo looked down. Aldo Ferrante. This company was established 4 years ago, Gianni said. Since then, it has received money from 11 different sources. 3 of those payments came from Vance's men in Charlestown, transferred on dates close to the 3 occasions when our shipments were detained. Massimo turned to the next page. What about the $25,000 on the 14th? It came from Harbor Line's own account. Gianni pulled out a bank statement and placed it on top. It was transferred out at 9:16 in the morning, then transferred back into Ferrante's personal account at 11:40 that same day. 2 hours and 24 minutes. Just long enough to print a transfer order. He paused. The money never left his hands, sir. It never came anywhere near Miss Marsh. Massimo said nothing. He continued turning the pages. And this, Gianni said. I found it while tracing the message history from the number Ferrante used for Harbor Line. The file contained a printout of telephone records. One number appeared 27 times over the past 4 months. Massimo looked at it and recognized it before Gianni could say the name. Miss Lombardi, Gianni said. She called Ferrante for the first time in June. Since then, every time you went to Providence, New York, or down to the harbor at night, there was a call from one number to the other within the 3 hours beforehand. He laid down the final page. And this is a message from the 21st of last month. Ferrante sent it to a number in Charlestown. Massimo read it. The message was very brief, just a few words saying that she had agreed, and that they should leave him alone and let him live if he agreed to marry her. But if he didn't, things would go another way. He read the entire line twice. Then he closed the file. He didn't strike the desk. He didn't say a word. He merely sat motionless for about 5 seconds, both hands resting flat on the cover. And during those 5 seconds, Gianni Sarno, a man who had stood beside this family for 19 years, took half a step back without even realizing that he had moved. Massimo rose. He reached for the overcoat hanging on the rack. Where are you going? Hanover Street. Now? Now. He fastened the buttons of his coat. Send 2 cars. One goes to Doyle's and parks outside on the street. No one goes in. No one asks any questions. They just stay there. And Ferrante? Massimo's hand paused at the final button. Don't touch him yet. Sir. Not yet. He looked at Gianni. If we move against him now, he'll know it's because of the girl. I don't want her name standing in the middle of this. But Massimo Vitale was already 1 step too late. Because that very afternoon, in a small office on Quincy Street, Whitmore had picked up the telephone and called his client. He said someone had just requested copies of every Harbor Line registration document. He said the request had come from a Boston law firm he didn't recognize. He said he was sure it was probably nothing, but he thought it proper to let him know. Aldo Ferrante thanked him, ended the call, and sat motionless in his car for a very long time. He had lived in this world for 45 years. He knew something younger men didn't, that once someone started asking for documents bearing your name, time was no longer measured in weeks. He took out his phone and called Francesca. "He knows," he said. "That's impossible. Someone just pulled the Harbor Line records. Who do you think would do that?" Silence came from the other end. "Listen to me," Aldo said. "This can go only one of two ways. Either he believes the file I gave him, and everything ends with the girl, or he no longer believes it, and then you and I are sitting in the same place. What are you going to do?" "I need that girl," Aldo said. "I need her sitting in front of me and signing a statement, admitting that she took the money. With her signature, the file becomes true. She won't sign it. She will." He looked through the windshield at the street as its lights began to come on. "Everyone has something that can make them sign, Miss Lombardi. I only need to find out what hers is." That evening, Delaney's phone vibrated once, and an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. The message arrived at 7:12 that evening. There was no greeting, only a photograph and 3 lines of text. The photograph showed the iron gate of the elementary school on the Salem Street side, taken from across the road in broad daylight. There was no one in the frame, only the gate, the fence, and the sign bearing the school's name. Beneath it were the words, "Warehouse number 9, East Harbor, 9 o'clock tonight. Come alone. Don't call anyone, because I'll know." Delaney read it 3 times. Then she placed the phone face down on the table and sat perfectly still. In the next room, Hattie was watching television. Upstairs, her daughter had been asleep for half an hour. She thought about calling the police. She considered it for exactly 15 seconds, long enough to understand that she had nothing. No name, no evidence. Only a message from an unfamiliar number and a photograph of a public school gate, something anyone passing by could have taken. She thought of another name. Her finger hovered over the screen for a very long time. Then she thought of the 3 pages laid on the dark wooden desk and the question about how much she had intended to take before she stopped, and she lowered the phone. She put on her coat. "Hattie." Hattie looked up. "I have to go out for a little while. There's something I need to take care of at work." "At this hour?" "Yes." Delaney stood in the doorway. "Please lock the door behind me. The downstairs door, too. Don't open it for anyone who knocks, even if it's someone you know." Hattie set down the television remote. "Delaney, please." She said it very softly. "I'll be home before 11 o'clock. If I'm not back by 11, call the police and tell them East Harbor." Then she left. East Harbor was cold and dark in December. Wind swept in from the water and cut between the rows of warehouses, making the sheet metal panels rattle. Delaney got off the bus at the final stop, walked another 15 minutes along an unlit road, and reached the entrance to warehouse number 9 at 5 minutes to 9. The lights were on inside. There were 3 men. Aldo Ferrante sat at a folding table set in the middle of the concrete floor, with a stack of papers and a pen in front of him. He rose when she entered, very politely, and pulled out a chair for her. "Sit down." Delaney remained standing. "What do you want?" "I want you to sign a paper." He pushed the stack toward her. "It's very simple. You confirm that on the 14th of last month, you received $25,000 in cash from me. Once you sign it, you can go home. I won't come looking for you again. I won't go looking for anyone at that diner again. Ever. I didn't take any money from you." "I know." Aldo nodded. "Just sign it." Delaney looked at the paper. "If I sign it, then the file you gave him becomes true, doesn't it?" He didn't answer. "And if I don't sign, Miss Marsh?" He sat down again, taking his time. "I'll retire when I'm 60. I have 15 years until then. How many times do you think a child will walk from the school gate to the diner during those 15 years? Delaney stood motionless. "I'm not threatening you," Aldo said. "I'm only explaining how things work." She sat down. She lowered herself into that chair, placed both hands on the table, and looked at the pen. She remained that way for a very long time. Inside her coat pocket, her fingers had already found her phone. She took it out, rested it on her lap beneath the table, and lit the screen. His name appeared at the top of her call list. She didn't press it, not because she was afraid, but because in all her 27 years, Delaney Marsh had never once called anyone to ask for help. In 4 foster homes, she had learned that when she called, no one came. When Trent left, she didn't call anyone. When her little girl suffered her first attack, Delaney carried her in her arms and ran more than half a mile to the clinic. She had done everything herself, alone, for her entire life. And now, sitting inside that freezing warehouse, the thought of pressing one name and saying the words "help me" felt harder than picking up the pen. 40 minutes passed. Aldo smoked 2 cigarettes. He didn't hurry her. He knew how to wait. In the 41st minute, Delaney looked down at the screen and thought of a folded scrap of paper left on the table beside the window. She pressed the name. The phone rang exactly once. Delaney. "I'm at warehouse number 9, she said. "East Harbor." 3 seconds of silence followed. "Stay where you are." The call ended. Delaney lowered the phone onto her lap. She picked up the pen, turned it slowly in her hand, and told Aldo she needed to read the paper again from the beginning. He told her to go ahead. She read every line, very slowly, more slowly than anyone had ever read a page. 19 minutes later, the sound of tires grinding over gravel came from outside. Then came the sound of a car door. Then several car doors. Aldo Ferrante rose from his chair. The warehouse's rolling door began to rise, slowly, shrieking along its iron track. Then there was silence. A long silence, so long that Delaney could hear the wind moving across the water. Then came footsteps on concrete. One person. Steady, unhurried. Delaney remained seated in the same chair, both hands resting on the table, and she didn't turn around. Massimo walked up behind her. He removed his overcoat and draped it around her shoulders. Then he placed one hand beneath her elbow and helped her to her feet. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask whether she was all right. He didn't ask why she had come there. He didn't ask why she had waited until the 41st minute to call. He led her outside, through the rolling door and across the gravel lot, to the car where the door was already open. Only after she was seated and he had closed the door did he bend down and look at her through the lowered window. "Next time," he said, "call in the first minute." He turned back toward the dark warehouse, his expression hardening into pure ice. Standing before a trembling Aldo Ferrante, Massimo slowly removed his leather gloves. "No one threatens a child in my city," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He looked at Gianni and gave a single, slight nod. To Gianni, Aldo's entire operation, hidden accounts, and power were completely destroyed overnight, and Ferrante was dragged out of Boston, never allowed to step foot in the state again. Rosaria learned what had happened at 9 o'clock that night, when Gianni called for the drivers and the entire house suddenly filled with people. She asked what was going on. No one answered her. She asked again, more sharply this time, and one of them let it slip that the young master had gone looking for Miss Marsh. From 9 o'clock until nearly 1 in the morning, the old woman sat in the living room with both hands resting on the head of her cane, refusing to go to bed. Every 15 minutes, she asked whether there was any news. At around 11 o'clock, she began to feel a tightness in her chest. She didn't tell anyone. She simply sat in silence, her breathing growing shallower, and by the time Teresa returned to the living room with a glass of warm water, Rosaria was slumped against the side of the chair, her face deathly pale. Massimo received the call just as the car was leaving East Harbor. He listened to 3 sentences, ended the call, and changed direction. Delaney sat beside him, still wrapped in his overcoat, and she saw his hands tighten around the steering wheel. What happened to her? Her heart. He said nothing more. General Hospital, 4th floor, cardiology. The hallway was white, cold, and long, carrying the sharp smell of antiseptic. It was the second time in less than a month that Delaney had sat in a hallway like this. The doctor said Rosaria was out of danger. Her blood pressure had stabilized, and she needed to remain under observation for 48 hours. Massimo stayed in the room with his mother for 20 minutes. When he came out, Delaney was already on her feet. "I'm going home. Stay. I only came because of your mother." She said it quickly, as though saying it faster would make it more true. "I wanted to know whether she was all right. Now I know." She stepped back. Massimo remained in the doorway of the hospital room. The hallway was about 15 meters long, and they stood at opposite ends of it. He didn't move toward her. She didn't walk away. "Miss Marsh, please don't." She shook her head. "Don't say anything. You believed him. I know. You laid 3 pages on the desk. I know. You asked how much I intended to take before I stopped." Her voice broke on the final word. She drew in a breath, held it, and refused to let herself cry. "I trusted you. I left my daughter with other people so I could come work in that house because I believed she would be safe there." Massimo said nothing, nor did he move from where he stood, perhaps because he knew that every step he took toward her now would only make her retreat another step. The door to the hospital room beside him opened slightly. A little girl stepped into the hallway. She was 7 years old, with long black hair and socks on her feet but no slippers. Delaney had never seen that face before. For 3 weeks, all she had known of the little girl was a sliver of light beneath a door and a tray no one touched. Bianca held a bundle of papers in her hands, small scraps folded in half, stacked together and tied with a strand of blue yarn. The bundle was thick, and the folds had grown soft, their edges worn thin, with the kind of wear that came from being opened and folded again countless times. Massimo looked at his daughter. He didn't understand. The little girl walked past him without stopping. She went down the hallway, crossed all 15 meters, and headed straight for Delaney. Then she wrapped both arms around Delaney's legs. Delaney froze. She looked down and saw the blue yarn, the frayed edges of the paper, and the upper corner of the outermost drawing where a crooked rabbit ear had been sketched. "Don't leave again," Bianca said. The hallway fell utterly silent. A nurse pushing a cart at the far end stopped completely. Delaney sank to her knees. She wrapped both arms around the little girl and buried her face in her hair. Massimo didn't move. He stood at the other end of the hallway, and for several seconds, there was nothing on his face at all. Then it began to break apart. He walked toward them. He made it 5 steps before collapsing, both knees striking the hospital tile, and he wrapped his arms around his daughter. "Bianca." He called her name. He said nothing else. He only said his daughter's name, once, then again, holding her tightly, and the man whose expression no one in all of Boston had ever seen change began to cry in the middle of the 4th-floor hallway, in front of a nurse, 2 guards, and the woman he had driven from his home 3 days earlier. Bianca didn't release Delaney's dress. She stood between them, one hand clutching her father's coat and the other clutching Delaney's, and she didn't speak another word that night, but she had already spoken one. Later, after the little girl had fallen asleep on the bench in the hallway, with her head resting in Delaney's lap, and the bundle of papers still clutched in her hand, Massimo sat down a short distance away. He stared at those papers for a very long time. "What are those?" he asked. Delaney pulled the thin blanket back over the little girl's shoulders. "Drawings," she said. "Every night, I left one on the tray outside her door. I didn't write anything. I only drew. For how long? 3 weeks." Massimo lowered his head, laced his fingers together, and remained that way for a very long time. 3 weeks, 1 scrap of paper every night. He had passed that door hundreds of times and had never left anything outside it but a tray. 3 days later, after Rosaria had returned home, Massimo asked Delaney to come to his study. On the desk sat a small metal basin and a file. "Sit down. I'd rather stand." He didn't insist. He opened the file, took out the first page, and lit it with a match. He burned each page one at a time, dropping it into the basin, and he didn't rush a single one. The copy of the debt agreement, the transfer order for $25,000, the photograph taken through the window of a cafe outside Quincy. When the flames had eaten halfway through the photograph, Massimo spoke. "I was wrong." Delaney didn't answer. "Someone gave me 3 pieces of paper, and I trusted 3 pieces of paper more than I trusted 3 weeks." He looked down at the metal basin. "There's nothing I can offer that will buy back what I did. Money can't buy it. For 3 nights, I've tried to think of another way, and I haven't found one." She watched the last fragments of ash fade into darkness. "I'm not going to forgive you today," she said. "I'm not asking you to." "Good." She drew in a breath. "But there's something I need to tell you. Go ahead. My daughter will not grow up afraid." She lifted her eyes and looked directly at him. "I grew up that way. I know what it does to a child. I was 6 years old when I learned to listen for footsteps outside the door, so I could tell what kind of night it was going to be. I won't let my daughter learn that." Massimo rose and walked toward the window. He remained silent for a long time. "I won't lie to you," he said. "I don't want you to lie to me. I'm not walking away from all of it. Do you understand? I can't sign a piece of paper and wake up tomorrow morning as a different man." He turned back toward her. "But there are things I can hand over. The collections. Everything south of the river. The part you saw on my shirt cuff that night. I'll give it to Gianni. I'll keep the transportation routes and the harbor. That part is clean. It has books, taxes, and my name on the licenses. But the other part will still exist. Yes, it'll still exist. It simply won't be in my hands anymore. Then what difference does it make? There is a difference. He looked at her. The difference is that I won't bring it home anymore. Delaney said nothing. But you need to understand the price, Massimo said. There will always be men standing outside my door. Not for a year. Forever. I'll never be able to go anywhere alone. There will always be a car behind me. Always someone sitting at the next table when I eat. The same will be true for anyone who lives in that house. He paused. I can keep your little girl from being afraid. I can't make her free. The only thing left in the room was the smell of burned paper. Delaney thought of the two men standing at the top of the stairs. She thought of Hattie pulling her by the hand outside the diner. She thought of what Francesca had said in the parking lot, that no one was ever driven out of that house. They simply stopped being protected. Then she thought of a bundle of papers tied with blue yarn. She looked Massimo straight in the eyes, and she nodded. 3 warehouses in the East End changed managers on the same day following Aldo Ferrante's swift removal. The name Ferrante was never spoken again in the Beacon Hill house, not because it had been forbidden, but because no one felt any need to say it anymore. Francesca Lombardi left as well. After receiving a sealed envelope from Massimo containing proof of her family's illegal financial ties, alongside a silent ultimatum, her father summoned her home, closed the door, and stripped her of everything. The following morning, under the watchful eyes of Vitali's men, she was driven straight to the airport. On the way there, her car stopped at a red light on the corner of Hanover Street. Across the road stood Doyle's diner. Delaney was inside, wiping the front window with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back in haste. Hattie said something to her from the kitchen, and Delaney looked up and laughed. Francesca watched through the car window. She had waited 20 years. She had attended the right schools, known the right people, said the right things, appeared at the right moments, and calculated every step throughout those 20 years. Sitting in that car that morning, watching a woman clean a diner window, she finally understood that what she had lacked had never been time. The light turned green. The car moved on. Delaney never saw it. She was busy wiping away the last faint streak in the lower right corner, the spot Hattie always complained could never be cleaned. 6 months later, on a May afternoon, there were 12 guests in the backyard of the house on Beacon Hill. There were no chandeliers, no musicians, no tablecloths embroidered with gold thread. There were only a few rows of wooden chairs arranged on the grass, a long table holding the cake, and the scent of lemon and rosemary drifting from the kitchen, where Teresa had been standing since morning. Hattie Doyle wore her finest dress, sat in the front row, and began crying before anything had even started. Rosaria sat in a wicker chair beneath the shade of a tree, her silver-tipped wooden cane propped beside her, and she never took her eyes off the 2 children running circles around the sprinkler in the middle of the yard. Poppy ran ahead, Bianca chased after her, and both girls had soaked the hems of their dresses. Both of them were laughing out loud. Delaney wore a simple white dress with no lace and no long veil. Her hair was tied neatly back. Massimo waited at the end of the grassy aisle, and for the first time since she had known him, he wasn't wearing a black overcoat. 2 men still stood outside the gate. There would always be 2 men standing there. She and Massimo both knew it as they looked at each other, and neither of them pretended it didn't exist. The ceremony was brief. When it was over, Bianca ran to embrace Delaney before she even embraced her father, while Poppy tugged at Bianca's hand and asked what they should call each other now. The 2 girls decided they would call each other sisters, then ran back to the sprinkler. Late that afternoon, after most of the guests had gone, Delaney sat down on a low chair beside Rosaria. The old woman reached out, took hold of her wrist, and squeezed. She squeezed hard, far harder than a 77-year-old woman should have been able to. Then she turned Delaney's hand palm up and gazed into it, just as she had done beneath the rain that afternoon. "I told you," she said. "Don't let life harden this hand." Delaney bowed her head and rested her forehead against Rosaria's shoulder, and the old woman stroked her hair as though she were stroking the hair of her own daughter. Out in the yard, the laughter of the 2 children still rang through the afternoon sunlight. Kindness is never an investment. It's something we give when we have nothing left to give, without ever expecting anything in return. But sometimes life gives back anyway, in ways no one could have foreseen. 30 seconds. That was all she had given on a rainy November afternoon, when no one was watching her, when she herself had nothing left in her hands. And life had given her back a home, 2 children, and a man feared by an entire city. A man who was gentle with only one person in the world. If Delaney's story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video with the people you love so that every day we can gather together and listen to more warm and heartfelt stories. How did today's story make you feel? Was there a moment that reminded you of something in your own life? Please leave a few words in the comments below. We sincerely hope to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish you and your family abundant health, and may every passing day bring you joy, peace, and serenity of spirit. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.